Julian Vance existed in a world of muted colors and hushed reverence. His life was a testament to precision, from the severe cut of his charcoal suits to the sterile geometry of his penthouse office that overlooked a city sprawling with chaotic, vibrant life he no longer felt a part of. He was the architect of a tech empire, a man whose name was synonymous with innovation and ruthless success, yet his own heart was a silent, locked room. Tonight, he stood within the glittering artifice of the annual Beaumont Foundation Gala, a gilded cage filled with the city's elite. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto polished marble floors, and the air, thick with expensive perfume and the low thrum of forced pleasantries, felt suffocating. He held a glass of champagne he had not touched, the tiny bubbles rising and dying in a silent, frantic dance. From his vantage point, near a towering marble column, he watched the couples twirling on the dance floor. He saw their easy smiles, the comfortable way their hands found each other, the shared glances that spoke a language he had long forgotten. For Julian, these displays of connection were like watching a foreign film without subtitles. He could appreciate the artistry, but could not comprehend the meaning. A profound, aching loneliness settled over him, as familiar and as heavy as a winter coat. It was an isolation of his own making, a fortress built brick by painful brick over 5 years of relentless grief. His fingers tightened around the cool glass, his thumb tracing the bezel of his watch. It was a simple, elegant timepiece, the last gift his wife, Sarah, had given him. Its steady, rhythmic ticking was a constant, maddening reminder of the seconds, minutes, and hours that continued to march forward while his own life had stopped dead on a rain-slicked road one autumn afternoon. The watch measured the time he was enduring, not living. It was his most cherished possession and his most brutal tormentor. Across the ballroom, near the grand entrance, his gaze fell upon a small figure who seemed as out of place as he felt. A little girl, no older than 6, stood with her back pressed against the velvet ropes. She wore a simple blue dress that looked homemade amidst the sea of designer gowns. Her dark hair was held back with a slightly crooked bow, and her wide, frightened eyes darted around the cavernous room, taking in the overwhelming spectacle of light and sound. She clutched the hand of a burly man in an ill-fitting suit, whose attention was fixed on the complimentary bar across the room. The man, impatient and gruff, gave her arm a sharp tug. The girl flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but Julian saw it. His focus narrowed, the noise of the gala fading into a dull roar. He watched the man lean down, his words a low, irritated growl that Julian couldn't hear but could easily imagine. The girl shook her head, her small body rigid with fear. Something in her posture, the way she tried to make herself smaller, to disappear into the folds of the opulent drapery, resonated with a deeply buried, agonizing chord within him. She looked like a lost sparrow in a flock of peacocks. The man, whose name Julian would later learn was Mark, finally lost his patience. He grabbed the girl's wrist more forcefully this time, intending to drag her through the crowd. It was then that the little girl turned her head, her gaze locking with that of a passing waiter. Her lips barely moved, her voice a fragile whisper, lost to almost everyone in the room. But not to Julian. He had become an expert in reading the silent pleas of the broken. He saw the desperate appeal in her eyes, and though he couldn't hear the words, he understood their essence. She was terrified. As Mark began to pull her away, she spoke again, this time her voice a little louder, trembling with a child's desperate honesty. She looked at a woman standing nearby who had noticed the commotion and shook her head, her whisper carrying a heartbreaking weight. "I don't know him." The words, quiet as they were, sliced through the opulent hum of the ballroom and struck Julian with the force of a physical blow. They were a child's ultimate declaration of fear, of abandonment, of being utterly alone in a world too big and too loud. They were the words his own daughter might have spoken. The fortress around his heart, 5 years in the making, cracked. He didn't think. He didn't weigh the consequences or consider the social awkwardness of involving himself. He simply moved. He set his untouched champagne flute on a passing tray and crossed the marble floor, his movements silent and deliberate. The crowd parted for him, a subconscious recognition of the power and purpose that radiated from him. He reached the trio just as Mark gave the little girl another impatient jerk. The child whimpered, a sound that twisted something in Julian's chest. Is there a problem here? Julian's voice was low and steady, yet it held a core of steel that made Mark freeze and turn around. The man's face was a mixture of annoyance and surprise, which quickly curdled into resentment as he took in Julian's expensive suit and commanding presence. No problem, Mark grunted, tightening his grip on the girl's wrist. Just minding my own business. This is my niece, Lily. Julian's gaze dropped to the small, white-knuckled hand trapped in the man's grasp, then shifted to Lily's terrified face. Her eyes were wide, brimming with unshed tears. She was looking at Julian with a silent, desperate plea. She seems distressed, Julian stated, his tone flat and unyielding. Perhaps you should let go of her arm. Mark bristled. Who do you think you are? I'm her uncle. I'm responsible for her. An uncle who frightens her, Julian countered, his voice dropping even lower, colder. She said she doesn't know you. A flush of anger crept up Mark's thick neck. She's just being difficult. She doesn't want to be here. He started to turn away, to pull Lily with him once more, but Julian took a small step, blocking his path. The confrontation was quiet, almost invisible to the rest of the gala's attendees, but the tension was a palpable thing. It was in that charged moment that a woman rushed toward them, her face pale with panic. She was wearing the simple black uniform of the event staff, a stark contrast to the glittering gowns around her. Her hair was slightly disheveled, as if she had been running. Lily, she cried out, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and terror. Oh, thank God. I'm so sorry. I just stepped away to the kitchen for a moment. She knelt, ignoring both men, and gathered the little girl into her arms. Lily buried her face in the woman's shoulder, her small body finally relaxing as she clung to the familiar scent and feel of safety. The woman stroked her hair, murmuring soft, reassuring words. It's okay, sweetie. I'm here now. I'm right here. She finally looked up, her gaze shifting from the hostile face of Mark to the calm, unreadable expression of Julian. Her eyes, a warm, worried brown, were full of apology. I am so sorry for any trouble. She nodded toward Mark, is her uncle. He was supposed to be watching her for just a few minutes. Julian looked from the woman's genuine, loving embrace to Mark's sullen defensiveness. It was clear where the child's trust and safety lay. He gave the woman a slight, almost imperceptible nod. There's no trouble, he said, his voice softer now. He then turned his full attention back to Mark. Your services are no longer required for the evening. You may leave. Mark sputtered, ready to argue, but he caught the look in Julian's eyes, a look of absolute, non-negotiable authority. He recognized a man who did not make suggestions. He gave orders. With a final, venomous glare at the woman, he turned and stomped away, disappearing into the glittering throng. The woman, whose name tag read Clara, looked up at Julian, her expression a mixture of gratitude and confusion. Thank you, she whispered, her voice still shaky. He's not very good with her. Julian's gaze softened as he looked at the little girl, now peeking out from behind Clara's shoulder. Her fear had subsided, replaced by a shy curiosity. It's loud in here, Julian said, his voice surprisingly gentle. And far too crowded for a conversation. He gestured toward a discreet door near the back of the ballroom. There's a private lounge. It's quiet. I could have someone bring you both some hot chocolate. Clara hesitated for a moment, taken aback by the unexpected kindness from this imposing, powerful man. She looked down at Lily, who was watching Julian with wide, solemn eyes. Then she looked back at him and saw something flicker in his gaze, not pity, but a deep, resonant understanding. It was a loneliness that recognized its own reflection. Okay, she said softly. Thank you. That would be very nice. The lounge was an oasis of tranquility. Soft lighting, plush velvet armchairs, and thick carpets absorbed all the noise from the gala, leaving only a profound and welcome silence. Julian had a waiter bring in 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate topped with whipped cream, and one for himself, though he knew he wouldn't drink it. He simply wanted to create a sense of shared experience, to make them feel less like an imposition and more like guests. Clara coaxed Lily into one of the large armchairs, wrapping a discarded cashmere throw from the sofa around her small shoulders. Lily took the mug in both hands, her eyes still wide as she looked at Julian over the rim. She didn't say a word, But her silence was no longer born of fear. It was a quiet, thoughtful observation. Julian sat in the chair opposite them, leaving a comfortable distance. He didn't press for details or ask intrusive questions. He simply sat with them in the quiet, a silent guardian. The warmth from the fireplace contrasted sharply with the icy formality of the ballroom he had just left. Here, in this small, insulated room, the air felt different. It felt real. Clara took a sip of her own hot chocolate, the warmth spreading through her, calming the last of her frayed nerves. "I'm Clara Reed," she said, finally breaking the comfortable silence. "And this is my niece, Lily." "Julian Vance," he replied, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. Clara's eyes widened slightly in recognition. Even a struggling artist working catering gigs knew that name. He was a titan, a figure from the headlines of business journals, not someone who intervened in family squabbles at a charity event. It made his earlier kindness all the more baffling and profound. "Mr. Vance," she said, a little flustered, "I really can't thank you enough. Mark, my sister asked him to help, but he doesn't understand Lily. She's very shy." Julian just nodded, his gaze fixed on the little girl, who was now using her finger to draw a smiley face in the condensation on her mug. "She's a brave girl," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. He saw a flash of his own daughter in that simple, innocent act, a ghost of a memory that was more vivid and less painful than it had been in years. For the first time, the memory brought not just a sharp stab of grief, but a faint, bittersweet warmth. They sat for a while longer, the silence punctuated only by the crackle of the fire and the soft sounds of Lily enjoying her treat. When the mug was empty, Lily's eyelids began to droop. She curled up in the massive chair, her head resting against Clara's side, and fell asleep. Clara looked at her niece's peaceful face, her heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. Then she looked at Julian. "I should get her home," she whispered. "I have to finish my shift, but—" "Don't worry about your shift," Julian said, standing. "I'll have my driver take you both home. I'll take care of things here." He pulled a sleek, minimalist business card from his wallet and held it out to her. "This has my personal number on it. If you need anything at all." Clara stared at the card. It felt impossibly heavy in her hand, a lifeline she never expected. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the deep, unspoken sadness that seemed to be the source of his unexpected empathy. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." "There's nothing to repay," he said quietly. And in that moment, he knew it was true. In helping them, he had felt the first real flicker of warmth in his frozen soul in 5 long years. It was he who was in their debt. A few days later, the warmth of that brief connection had faded, replaced by the harsh chill of reality. Clara stood in her small, cramped apartment, an eviction notice clutched in her hand. The legal troubles engulfing her sister and brother-in-law had become a financial black hole, swallowing every cent she had. Mark had proven to be worse than useless, and the temporary guardianship of Lily felt more precarious than ever. The thought of being put on the street with the little girl who depended on her for everything was a cold, sharp terror. She stared at the elegant, silver-embossed card on her kitchen counter. Julian Vance. Making the call felt like an admission of absolute failure, a desperate plea from a world he had no real reason to care about. Her pride warred with her fear. For hours, she paced the small apartment while Lily napped, the card a silent challenge on the counter. Finally, with trembling fingers and a heart pounding with desperation, she dialed the number. He answered on the second ring, his voice as calm and steady as she remembered. "Vance, Mr. Vance. It's Clara Reed. We met at the gala." Her own voice was a shaky whisper. There was a brief pause on the other end, but not of confusion. It was a pause of consideration. "Clara," he said, and the simple use of her first name was strangely reassuring. "Is everything all right?" The dam of her composure broke. The words tumbled out, the eviction, the financial strain, the fear for Lily. She didn't ask for money. She didn't even know what she was asking for. She was simply casting a message in a bottle into a vast, indifferent ocean, hoping he was the shore. When she finished, the silence on the line was heavy. She was sure he was about to politely dismiss her, to offer a token sum of money through an assistant. Instead, his response was something she could never have predicted. I have a proposition for you, he said, his tone entirely practical. My estate is large. It requires a great deal of upkeep. My current housekeeper is retiring. The position comes with a private cottage on the grounds. It's fully furnished. The salary would be more than enough to cover your expenses. Clara was stunned into silence. A job? A home? But I don't have any experience as an estate manager, she stammered. You are responsible, and you are trustworthy, he stated, as if these were the only qualifications that mattered. And, he added, his voice softening almost imperceptibly, the grounds are very safe. There's a large garden, a good place for a child. It was then that she understood. This wasn't about his house. This was about Lily. This was his way of extending a hand, of offering a sanctuary without the indignity of charity. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of profound, overwhelming relief. Yes, she whispered, her voice cracking. Yes, of course. Thank you. Moving into the cottage on Julian Vance's estate was like stepping into another world. The main house was a marvel of modern architecture, all glass and steel and stone, beautiful but cold, like a museum. It sat on acres of meticulously manicured lawns that rolled down to a serene, private lake. The cottage, however, was different. Nestled behind a grove of ancient oak trees, it was made of warm stone and ivy, with a small, welcoming porch and window boxes ready for flowers. It was a home. For the first few days, Clara and Lily tiptoed around the estate as if they were ghosts, afraid to make a sound, afraid to disturb the profound silence that seemed to emanate from the main house. Julian was a distant presence. They would see his car sweep down the long driveway in the morning and return long after dark. He was polite, formal, but kept his distance, and Clara wondered if he regretted his impulsive offer. But Lily, with the unburdened heart of a child, was not intimidated by the silence or the grandeur. For her, the estate was a paradise. She discovered the joy of rolling down the grassy hills, of chasing butterflies in the meadows near the lake, and of talking to the stern-faced but secretly soft-hearted groundskeeper. Her laughter, clear and bright as a bell, began to drift through the open windows of the main house. It was a sound those walls had not heard in a very long time. Clara, too, began to find her place. She discovered a large, neglected greenhouse at the edge of the property, its glass panes clouded with dust, its interior filled with withered, forgotten plants. She saw not decay, but potential. With the groundskeeper's permission, she set to work, cleaning the glass, turning the soil, and coaxing life back into the abandoned space. The greenhouse became her sanctuary, a place where she could create beauty and order, a small act of healing in the midst of so much quiet sorrow. One afternoon, Julian came home earlier than usual. He walked through his house, the silence pressing in on him as always, but today it was different. It was punctuated by a faint, unfamiliar sound. He followed it to the large glass doors that led to the back terrace. There, on the lawn, Lily was teaching a stone garden gnome how to dance, her small voice humming a tuneless song. Julian stopped, hidden in the shadows of the doorway, and simply watched. A smile, a real, unforced smile, touched his lips for the first time in years. It felt like a foreign muscle waking from a long slumber. The house was changing. The sterile air began to hold the faint, sweet scent of the flowers Clara brought in from the garden. The oppressive silence was now broken by the distant sound of a child's play. It was unsettling and, to his astonishment, deeply comforting. He started coming home earlier. He would find excuses to walk by the greenhouse, where he would see Clara, her face smudged with dirt, her expression peaceful and focused as she tended to her blossoming plants. They began to fall into a quiet rhythm. Sometimes they would have dinner together in the vast, formal dining room, the three of them feeling comically small at the enormous table. But slowly, the formality began to melt away. They started eating in the cozy kitchen instead, the conversation simple and easy. Julian learned that Lily loved stories about dragons and that Clara dreamed of one day having her own art studio. Clara learned that Julian liked his coffee black and that he had a quiet, dry wit that only emerged when he was relaxed. One rainy evening, while Clara was reading a story to Lily in the cottage, a frantic knock came at the door. It was Julian, his face pale, his composure shattered. "It's Lily," he said, his voice strained. "She's not in the house. I can't find her. Panic seized Clara, but she pushed it down, her mind racing. The greenhouse, she said, grabbing a raincoat. She loves it there, but they had already checked. They searched the grounds, their calls swallowed by the rain and the wind. The fear was a cold, sharp thing in Clara's chest. It was Julian who finally found her. He remembered a small, locked door at the end of the upstairs hallway in the main house, a door he never, ever opened. He ran there, his heart pounding in his ears, and found Lily sitting on the floor in front of it, her hand resting on the cool wood. She wasn't crying. She was just sitting there, waiting patiently. Lily, Julian breathed, relief washing over him so intensely his knees felt weak. He knelt beside her. What are you doing here? She looked up at him, her expression serious. It's sad in here, she said simply, patting the door. It needs to be opened. Clara arrived then, breathless. When she saw where they were, she stopped, sensing she had stumbled upon a sacred, sorrowful place. She looked at Julian, whose face had become a mask of unbearable pain. He stared at the door as if it were a tombstone. With a trembling hand, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, ornate key. He hadn't touched it in 5 years. He unlocked the door and pushed it open, revealing the room within. It was a little girl's bedroom, preserved perfectly, a museum of a life cut short. A canopy bed with a pink duvet, a shelf full of stuffed animals, and crayon drawings taped to the wall. It was frozen in time. This was my daughter's room, Julian said, his voice thick and raw. Her name was also Lily. Clara gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. The shared name was a coincidence so poignant it felt like a twist of fate. Julian finally let the story pour out of him, the words jagged with years of unshed grief. He told her about Sarah, his brilliant, vibrant wife. He told her about their Lily, a little girl with a laugh that could fill a house. He told her about the accident, the slick road, the phone call that had cleaved his life into a before and an after. He spoke of the guilt, the crushing, relentless guilt of being the sole survivor. Clara didn't offer empty platitudes or tell him it wasn't his fault. She simply stood beside him, her presence a warm, solid anchor in his storm of memory. She listened, and in her quiet, empathetic listening, he felt a profound sense of release, as if a pressure valve in his soul had finally been opened. Little Lily, who had wandered into the room, picked up a small, worn teddy bear from the bed. She walked back to Julian and held it out to him. You can share, she said, her voice full of a child's simple, profound generosity. Julian took the bear, its worn fur familiar beneath his fingers. He looked from the ghost of the daughter he had lost to the living, breathing child in front of him. He looked at Clara, her eyes shining with unshed tears for his pain. And in that room of sorrow, surrounded by the ghosts of his past, he felt the first, fragile seed of a future he had never thought possible. The three of them stood there, a broken man, a kind woman, and an innocent child, and for the first time, the vast, empty house began to feel like a home. In the weeks that followed, the fragile seed of hope began to grow. The unspoken truth of that night in his daughter's room had changed everything. The pretense of their arrangement, employer and employee, dissolved, replaced by a delicate, unspoken intimacy. Julian stopped being just Mr. Vance. He became Julian, and he, in turn, began to see Clara not as a caretaker for his home, but as the caretaker of his slowly healing heart. Happiness was a foreign country Julian was cautiously beginning to explore. He found himself looking forward to the end of the day, not with the usual dread of returning to an empty house, but with an eagerness to hear about Lily's latest adventure or to share a quiet cup of tea with Clara in the now thriving greenhouse. He attended Lily's school play, sitting in the front row between a proud Clara and an empty seat he no longer felt was haunted, but simply saved in loving memory. During the final bow, as Lily beamed at them from the stage, his hand found Clara's, their fingers lacing together in a gesture that felt as natural and as necessary as breathing. He was learning to live in the present. The constant, ticking reminder of his watch seemed to quiet, its rhythm less a countdown of lost time and more a simple measure of the new, precious moments he was collecting. He was laughing again. He was feeling again. And it was terrifying. The higher he climbed out of his pit of grief, the further he had to fall. The fall came sooner than he expected. The triggering event was not a dramatic confrontation, but a glossy page in a society magazine left open on the boardroom table before a meeting. A photograph, taken with a long lens at the school play, showed the three of them, Julian, Clara, and Lily, laughing together. The caption beneath it was a masterpiece of casual cruelty. CEO Julian Vance finds a convenient new family. Has the tech mogul finally replaced the ones he lost? The words hit him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. Replaced. The word was a poison dart, striking the deepest, most vulnerable part of his soul. It validated every dark fear he had harbored, that his new happiness was a betrayal of Sarah and his Lily, that he was simply slotting new people into old, empty roles. Later that day, a business rival, a man known for his viperous tongue, passed him in the hallway. "Congratulations, Vance," the man said with a smug smile. "Good to see you've moved on. Found yourself a new model, I see." The casual, venomous remark was the final straw. Julian felt a cold, familiar dread wash over him. The guilt he had kept at bay came roaring back, a tidal wave of self-loathing. He saw his wife's face, her loving smile, now seeming to accuse him. He saw his daughter's room, not as a place of healing, but as a shrine he had desecrated with his own selfishness. He was unworthy of this new joy. He would only end up destroying it, just as he felt he had destroyed everything else he had ever loved. He retreated. The walls he had so carefully dismantled over the past months were rebuilt in a matter of hours, higher and thicker than ever before. When he returned to the estate that evening, the warmth and light that had begun to fill his eyes was gone, replaced by a familiar, glacial emptiness. He was once again Julian Vance, the wounded executive, a man encased in ice. Clara felt the change the moment he walked through the door. The easy smile he usually had for her was gone. His eyes, which had started to meet hers with such warmth, now looked straight through her. He was polite, distant, and devastatingly formal. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. "Julian, is something wrong?" she asked gently that evening, finding him staring out at the rain-streaked windows of his study. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable, his voice devoid of all emotion. "This was a mistake," he said, the words precise and clinical. "This whole arrangement." Clara's heart stopped. "What? What do you mean?" "I mean this," he said, gesturing vaguely to encompass the house, the greenhouse, the life they had started to build. "It's a temporary situation. I think it's best if we start to think about a more permanent solution for you and Lily. Elsewhere." The coldness of his words was more painful than any angry outburst could have been. Elsewhere. He was casting them out. She searched his face for any sign of the man who had held her hand, who had cried in front of her, but he was gone. All she saw was a powerful, remote stranger. The hope she had so carefully nurtured withered and died. She finally understood. She and Lily had just been a distraction, a temporary balm for his grief. They were placeholders, and now he was done playing house. "I see," she said, her voice quiet but steady, her dignity a thin shield against the shattering pain. "I understand. I'll start looking for a new place immediately." She turned and walked away, not letting him see the tears that were already burning her eyes. The silence that descended upon the house was worse than before. It was not an empty silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, filled with misunderstanding and heartbreak. Julian locked himself in his study, drowning his sorrow in work, while Clara moved through her days with a quiet, heartbreaking grace, packing their few belongings into boxes. Lily, with her child's intuition, knew that something was terribly wrong. The laughter had stopped. The easy warmth between her aunt and the sad, kind man had vanished, replaced by a chasm of cold air. She watched them from a distance, her small face creased with worry. She didn't understand the adult world of fear and guilt, but she understood sadness. One afternoon, she sat at the small table in the cottage, a box of crayons spread before her. She drew with intense concentration, her small tongue sticking out from the corner of her mouth. When she was finished, she carefully folded the piece of paper. She snuck into the main house, which was quiet as a tomb, and made her way to the closed door of Julian's study. She slid the drawing underneath it, then scurried away before she could be seen. Hours later, Julian finally emerged from his self-imposed prison, his eyes gritty from lack of sleep, his soul aching with a misery of his own creation. As he stepped out of his study, his foot brushed against the small piece of paper. He bent down and picked it up. He unfolded it. It was a child's drawing. There were 4 figures, simple stick people, holding hands under a large, smiling yellow sun. On one side was a tall man with dark hair. Next to him was a woman with brown hair, Clara, and holding her other hand was a little girl with a crooked bow, Lily. But there was a 4th figure. On the other side of Julian, floating just above the ground, was another person with a halo over her head. An angel. She was smiling too. And in the angel's hand was a string, and on the end of that string was a balloon tied to Julian's wrist. She wasn't pulling him away. She was letting him go. Julian stared at the drawing, and the fortress around his heart didn't just crack this time. It crumbled into dust. The simple, profound innocence of the child's vision cut through all his complex layers of guilt and fear. Lily didn't see replacement. She saw addition. She saw a family on earth being watched over by a family in heaven. She saw that love didn't have to be a choice between the past and the present. It could be a bridge. The realization struck him with the force of a physical revelation. He wasn't betraying Sarah by loving Clara. He was honoring the love Sarah had taught him by allowing his heart to feel again. His fear, his cowardice, was about to cost him the most beautiful, hopeful thing that had entered his life since the darkness fell. He was destroying his future to punish himself for a past he could not change. He ran. He didn't walk. He didn't stride. He ran through the silent, cavernous house, his heart pounding not with dread, but with a desperate, surging hope. He burst through the doors and sprinted across the manicured lawn toward the cottage, the rain starting to fall again, mingling with the tears streaming down his face. He found Clara in the living room, carefully wrapping a small, framed photo of her and Lily in newspaper. The last box was nearly sealed. She looked up as he entered, her face pale, her eyes shadowed with a grief that mirrored his own. "Don't stop," he said, his voice ragged, breathless from his run and the sheer weight of his emotions. She looked at him, confused. "What?" "Don't stop packing," he clarified, his voice growing stronger. "But don't pack to leave. Pack to move into the main house. With me." Clara stared at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and hurt. "Julian, I can't play this game. My heart can't take it." He crossed the room in 3 long strides and gently took her hands, his grip firm and sure. He looked directly into her eyes, letting her see the raw, unguarded truth in his own. "This isn't a game. I am so sorry, Clara. I was a fool. I was a coward." The words poured out of him, a torrent of confession and apology. "I let my fear, my guilt, speak for me. I was so terrified of betraying the memory of my wife that I almost threw away the chance to have a life again. The chance to have a life with you." He pulled Lily's drawing from his pocket and held it out for her to see. "She sees it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A child sees it so clearly. It's not about replacement. It's about letting your heart grow bigger. My heart has been closed for 5 years, Clara. You and Lily. You blew the doors off. You let the light in. And I panicked." He took a deep, shuddering breath. "I love you," he said, the 3 words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I am in love with you. And I love that little girl as if she were my own. I'm not asking you to be a replacement for anyone. I'm asking you to be my future. Please, don't leave. Stay. Build a life with me. Be my family." Tears streamed down Clara's face, but they were no longer tears of sorrow. They were tears of disbelief, of hope, of a joy so profound it was painful. She saw in his eyes the man she had fallen in love with, the kind, sad man who had offered a little girl a cup of hot chocolate, the vulnerable man who had shared his deepest pain, the strong man who was now fighting for her. For them. She didn't need words. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder, and her answer was in the way she held on to him, a silent, powerful affirmation. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, and for the first time, the gaping wound in his soul began to truly close. A few weeks later, Julian stood on the stage at another grand corporate event. But this time, he was not alone. Clara stood by his side, radiant in a simple, elegant dress, her hand held firmly in his. Lily stood in front of them, clutching his other hand, looking out at the crowd with a shy but confident smile. The same business rival from before approached them, his smile slick with condescension. "Well, Vance," he began, his eyes flicking dismissively over Clara. "I see your domestic arrangement is still ongoing." The old Julian would have frozen him with a glare. The new Julian smiled, a calm, easy smile. He squeezed Clara's hand and then bent down to lift Lily into his arms, settling her comfortably on his hip. He looked the rival directly in the eye, his voice clear and resonant, carrying easily to those standing nearby. "This is Clara Reed," he said, his gaze full of pride and love as he looked at her. "The woman I love." Then he looked at Lily, who beamed at the attention. "And this is Lily. They are not an arrangement," he paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "They are my family." The statement was simple, direct, and utterly unshakable. It was a public declaration, a line drawn in the sand. The rival's smug expression faltered, and he mumbled an excuse before melting back into the crowd. Julian didn't watch him go. His attention was only on the two people who mattered most. He looked at Clara, and in her shining eyes, he saw his future. He saw home. Months later, the last chill of winter had finally given way to a vibrant, determined spring. The greenhouse, once a skeleton of forgotten potential, was now a riot of color and life. Sunlight streamed through the spotless glass panes, illuminating the deep greens of ferns, the brilliant reds of geraniums, and the delicate whites of jasmine vines that climbed the walls, filling the air with their sweet perfume. Julian was on his knees in the rich, dark soil. He had traded his tailored suit for worn jeans and a soft cotton shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Dirt was smudged on his cheek and embedded under his fingernails, and he had never felt more content. Beside him, Lily, in a pair of bright yellow rain boots, carefully patted the earth around a small, hopeful-looking sapling. "Is that good, Julian?" she asked, looking up at him, her face a mask of serious concentration. "It's perfect, Lilybug," he said, his voice warm with an affection that was now second nature. "You're a natural gardener." He watched as she gently watered the sapling from a small, red watering can, her movements full of a tender, innate care. He saw so much of Clara in her. Clara stood in the doorway of the greenhouse, a sketchbook in her hand and a soft smile on her face. She had been sketching the play of light on a new orchid, but her attention had been drawn to the scene in front of her. Julian looked up and caught her eye. The look that passed between them was one of quiet, profound understanding. It spoke of shared mornings, of late-night conversations, of nightmares soothed and dreams encouraged. It spoke of a love that had been forged not in perfection, but in the acceptance of brokenness. The vast estate was no longer silent. It was filled with the sounds of their life. Lily's laughter as Julian chased her across the lawn, the murmur of their voices from the kitchen late at night, the soft scratch of Clara's charcoal on paper in the new art studio Julian had built for her in a sun-filled wing of the house. He had come to understand that the silence he had lived in for so long was not merely an absence of sound. It had been an absence of love. Later that afternoon, the three of them lay on a blanket by the lake, watching the clouds drift by in the endless blue sky. Lily was nestled between them, her head resting on Julian's chest, her small hand clutching one of Clara's fingers. "That one looks like a dragon," Lily declared, pointing a chubby finger at a particularly fluffy cloud. "It does," Julian agreed, his voice a low rumble. "And that one," he pointed, "looks like a castle." Clara turned her head, her hair spilling onto the blanket. "And that one," she said softly, her eyes on Julian, "looks like us." He followed her gaze to a small, tight cluster of clouds, one large, one medium, one small, drifting together, inseparable from the others. He smiled, a genuine, soul-deep smile that reached his eyes and erased the last shadows of his long winter. He tightened his arm around Lily and reached his free hand out to cover Clara's. He thought of the man he used to be, lost in the gilded cage of a ballroom, a ghost at the feast of life. He had believed his heart was a locked room, its only purpose to serve as a memorial to what he had lost. But Clara and Lily had not picked the lock or broken down the door. They had simply stood outside, radiating so much warmth and light that he had been compelled to open it himself. They hadn't replaced his past. They had given him a reason to have a future. Here, under the warm sun, with the two people he loved most in the world, He was not lost. He was found. He was finally and truly home.